Hello, and welcome to the Federal Housing Finance Agency's Duty to Serve public listening sessions on the enterprise's proposed 2022 and 2024 underserved market plans. I am Toy Roberts, a member of the Duty to Serve team, and I will be emceeing today's session, and this session is being recorded. Today, we will hear comments on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's proposed new plans for the affordable housing preservation market. But before we get started, I'd like to first introduce you to the lead of our Duty to Serve team, the Managing Director of Duty to Serve, Ms. Marcia Berenger.
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thanks, Toy. I'm Marcia Berenger, and I'm the Supervisory Policy Analyst for the Duty to Serve program here at FHFA. Acting Director Sandra Thompson was originally scheduled to provide opening remarks this afternoon, and she is very sorry that she is unable to do so. Instead, it's my pleasure today to introduce Ted Wortell, who certainly knows the Duty to Serve program very well, and who will be providing our opening remarks. Ted is Associate Director for the Office of Housing and Community Investment in the Division of Housing Mission and Goals at FHFA. He oversees FHFA's regulation of the enterprise's duty to serve and housing goals, as well as the Federal Home Loan Bank system's affordable housing and community development programs. Ted?
Thanks, Marcia, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and some of you welcome back. This is now our second of the 3 listening sessions this week on the enterprise's draft plans. Let me start just relaying regrets from Sandra Thompson. I hope people noticed in her public statement, I think when the day that she was appointed, her real emphasis on the importance of the affordable housing mission of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the Federal Home Loan Banks. I think all of us will hear more of that. We are already hearing more of it internally. We talked to her a couple of days after that about these sessions. She was really very insistent about being able to kick off each of them, but had a personal matter come up unexpected at the end of last week. We are hopeful she'll be back and able to kick off tomorrow's session. That said, let me thank all of you for your time and for either as attending or presenting this afternoon. I suspect most people on this call have been with us on Duty to Serve for quite some time, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate how important these sessions are, along with comments on the RFI on the plans and all kinds of other less formal ways we have of communicating about Duty to Serve. I can guarantee just about guarantee, I think, everyone that both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will incorporate things that they hear today and this week into the next draft of their plans. And I certainly assure you that we will incorporate, I think, a great deal of what we will hear and learn today into our informal and formal comments on their plans. Just a reminder, again, we've all been working on Duty to Serve together for a while. This is an exciting time. Duty to Serve is not a startup anymore. We've got well over 3 years of actual practical on the ground experience with the plans. And so I think we're really at a point now where what we talk about in the next couple of days will really inform where to stay the course, where to make adjustments, what the priorities should be, and so on, as opposed to the initial plan discussions we had in 2017. I would certainly say, despite the challenges of the pandemic last year, both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had successes in duty to serve. A couple that come to mind, Freddie Mac's Rural Research Symposium, because it was available virtually, managed to reach, I think, twice as many people as the first session. I think Fannie Mae, I guess off the top of my head, in terms of their training programs for rural CDFIs and Native American CDFIs, and both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac certainly were very active in the LIHTC in their LIHTC investments. So we're all pleased with that, but we are also very much in a place where we are wanting and encouraging Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to incorporate much more into their plans. And we appreciate the help and the input we'll get on that today. So thanks very much. Let me turn it back to Toy, who will introduce the first speaker.
Thank you, Ted. All right, before we move forward with the remainder of the agenda, I do have a few important housekeeping remarks. As you know, we have organized this webinar in order to obtain your input on the enterprise's proposed 2022 through 2024 underserved market plans for the affordable housing preservation market. During today's session, FHFA will not discuss the status or timing of any potential rulemaking. If FHFA does decide to engage in a rulemaking on any matters discussed at today's session, this session would not take the place of a public comment process. The rulemaking document would establish the public comment process, and you would need to submit your comments, if any, in accordance with the submission instructions in that document. FHFA may summarize the feedback gathered at today's session in a future rulemaking document if we determine that a summary would be useful to explain the basis of a rulemaking. Also, please keep in mind that nothing said in today's session would or should be construed as binding on or a final decision by the FHFA director or FHFA staff. Any questions we may have are focused on understanding your views and do not indicate a position of FHFA staff or the agency. Now, with that said, we have a great lineup of speakers today. We will hear from 13 guest speakers, and midway through, we will have a short 10-minute break. Each speaker will have up to 10 minutes to speak, and we will try our best to stay on schedule and ask that everyone speaking help us do so as well. I will chime in to give speakers a 1-minute warning as their time draws to a close. If someone does go over their time, unfortunately, I will have to interrupt you in order to keep us on schedule. Each speaker will have the ability to mute and unmute their microphones throughout the session, but we ask that you keep your microphones muted until it is your time to speak. We also ask that all speakers be prepared to turn on their video cameras during their speaking segments. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, we are recording today's session. FHFA will also prepare a transcript of today's session, which will include the names of all speakers and the organizations you represent. We will post the recording and transcript on FHFA's website and YouTube channel, along with any materials being presented today. Now, before we begin to hear from our guest speakers, each enterprise will give brief opening statements. And as we close, they will also give closing remarks. First up, we will hear from Freddie Mac. Speaking from Freddie Mac Duty Serve team are Mr. Michael Dawson, Mr. Corey Aber, and Mr. Dennis Smith.
Well, thank you. And on behalf of Freddie Mac, welcome and thank you for taking the time to be here today. I'm Mike Dawson, Vice President in the Single Family Organization of Freddie Mac and the Client and Community Engagement Group. Now, we've valued your support and your partnerships over the last several years and your dedication to affordable housing preservation and the communities that you serve. We look forward to hearing from you today and continue to work with partnering with you and showing success in these challenging markets. Now, with that, I do want to turn it over to Corey Aber and Dennis Smith, who will go in through a little bit more detail about our plans.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to everybody else on the line today. We are really looking forward to hearing everything you have to say and factoring that in as we finalize our next plan. And in light of that, duty to serve is fundamental to our mission and fundamental to our business, and everything we're doing here is an extension of both. And as we look back on the last plan and at the same time look forward to the next, there are a few things that stand out. And Toy, if you could advance the slides a bit. One is a key focus on liquidity to the market. We had that strongly in our first plan, and we were focused both on how do we build a foundation, how do we learn more and attract more interest and investment in these markets, but also how do we have an impact immediately where possible. And this time around, in the next plan, we're continuing that. We're continuing that focus on liquidity and increasing our focus on immediate impact. There's also a clear focus on partnership with all of you. How can we build on that more to increase our impact and understand the needs better over time, and where possible, make a difference according to those needs. Again, if you could advance the slides one or two more. Thank you very much. And again, thought leadership and research was a core part of our first plan, and that's continuing in this one as well. And Ted mentioned the Rural Research Symposium. We had a lot of different research papers and tools that we came out with in our first plan, and we're looking to build on that in this next one. But again, this is core to our business, core to our mission, and we're gonna continue on that. If you could advance to the next slide, just highlight a few things from our last plan cycle. Almost $23 billion in loan purchases and investments in the affordable housing preservation market. Almost 200,000 rental households served, and a clear increase in our business from the beginning of the plan cycle to the end of the plan cycle. And you'll see in this plan a continuing increase in our commitment and our targets versus the first plan. And these are some themes that you'll see throughout the plan, and we hope to hear from you on how we can exercise those themes, how we can do better. And Dennis, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you everyone for attending today. As Corey mentioned, we did a lot of foundation building in both multifamily and single family, and that wouldn't be possible without your input, your partnership, and your expertise. We don't live in a vacuum, and we need all the market participants' assistance to make certain that we're successful and that you're successful. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, Toy, please. Duty to Serve was established to really help that long-standing challenges in those markets. And today we're talking about affordable housing preservation, and we're making a difference. But we also understand that we're just scratching the surface. And we really look forward to hearing what you have to say today about our plan and about feedback that you have coming from your unique position within the marketplace. So thank you for allowing us a few minutes to open the conversation, and we look forward to hearing from you today, and we'll be back at the end. So thank you. Back to you, Toy.
Thank you. All right, so now we will hear, now we will hear from Fannie Mae. Speaking from the Fannie Mae Duty to Serve team is Miss Sarah Edelman.
Thanks, Toy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Edelman, and I am Fannie Mae's Senior Director for Engagement and Impact. It's my pleasure to share with you a quick overview of our key accomplishments in the affordable housing preservation market in the first cycle, as well as how we're going to continue to build on our work in 22 through 24. Fannie Mae's purpose and mission is to ensure that there's liquidity in the single family and multifamily mortgage markets everywhere across the country every day, while improving access to sustainable mortgage financing for low and moderate income borrowers. And our duty to serve activities complement this core mission by challenging us to increase access to mortgage credit beyond our current investments in 3 of the country's toughest markets. We have an excellent duty to serve team, but we can't do this work without you and your collaboration and support. So thank you for working with us throughout the first cycle as we test and learn. Thank you for your guidance today on how we can strengthen the proposed duty to serve plan. Can you go to slide 3, please? So I want to quickly review some of the key highlights from the first duty to serve cycle that we plan to build on in the next plan. On multifamily, we brought significant new liquidity to the multifamily preservation markets. We exceeded past record years for our acquisitions of loans and finance that finance Section 8 properties, as well as LIHTC loan purchases. We also purchased loans for 48 rental assistance demonstration properties over the first cycle. Prior duty to serve, we had only ever purchased a handful of these. In 2017, for instance, we only purchased 3 such loans. So this was we massively grew these core affordable housing preservation markets. In single family, we significantly improved our energy offerings for consumers, and we worked with several utilities to set up a no-cost smart thermostat program for LMI borrowers to help them save on their housing, to begin saving on their housing costs. We also improved our renovation loan offerings and executed policy changes to improve our shared equity product. Now, looking forward over the next 3 years, and you can go to slide 5, please. So we will be further expanding our energy efficiency work by building out the data capabilities to offer a green, social, or sustainable bond that includes duty to serve eligible homes. That is, existing properties where energy improvements have been made that can expand the long-term affordability of the home. We'll also resume purchase targets for green single-family loans starting in the 2nd year of the plan. We're resuming our shared equity loan purchase targets after a pause and rolling out new standardization documents, as well as a new program certification program that we hope will make shared equity loans easier for lenders to originate and attract new loan originators to this business. Our aim here is really to make it just as easy to originate a loan in a community land trust or a shared equity program as it is any other loan. And finally, we'll work with partners on place-based strategies to stabilize neighborhoods affected by distressed homes and to preserve the long-term affordability of restored properties. Slide 6, please. On the multifamily side, we're going to continue to do much of the current work underway and that I explained in my previous comments. And we're looking forward to expanding in a few key areas. So we want to build out our RAD work. We want to build that out more. So we're aiming to build that out to close to 30% over the next cycle, the next plan cycle. We are looking forward to deepening our partnerships and increasing acquisitions from state and local affordable programs where we see new opportunity. And we're also expanding our role in the rural preservation market by committing to buy loans that preserve maturing Section 15 properties. We'll be aiming to provide financing for the preservation for about 15% of those maturing properties each year. So we look forward to ramping up this work in the new plan and eager today to hear your comments and where you think there are opportunities that we've missed. So thank you for your time and for participating today. Back to you, Toy.
Thank you, Ms. Edelman. All right, so now without further ado, we will begin hearing from our guest speakers. And our first speaker we have is Mr. David Nipsex from the Housing Assistance Council.
Thanks, Toy, and good afternoon, all. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank the staff at FHFA. Recognizing they do tremendous service on all of our behalf. Marcia, Ted, your colleagues, I can speak from experience that the families and people that benefit from your thoughtful approach and hard work sometimes feel pretty far away from an office on 7th Street. But you deserve as much thanks and praise and recognition for helping people and communities as all the rest of us on the line. And I'd also like to express an appreciation for the staff at Fannie and Freddie. Mike and Corey at Freddie, Mike and Sarah at Fannie, your efforts to bend the work of these trillion-dollar corporations to the good of the public is much appreciated. You're really good partners. You listen often and are clearly committed to helping harness housing finance for rural folk. So as Toy said, my name's David Nipsex, President and CEO at Housing Assistance Council, and HAC is a national nonprofit established to improve conditions for the rural poor with an emphasis on the poorest of the poor in the most rural places. We provide below market financing, technical assistance, training, information services, and everything we do is focused on building up the capacity of local organizations so that our local partners are there working every day to help folks in need and rural communities prosper. For this session, HAC's playing one of its favorite roles. We love to provide this independent, nonpartisan research, high quality analysis. We do it openly, freely, and support of the agencies, the enterprises, and all the organizations on here. And I think we all have that collective goal of wanting sound federal policy shaped by data and evidence. In my comments today, I'll focus on the two most powerful predictors in a rural community's success. One, access to affordable and flexible capital for housing community development. And two, the capacity of community-based organizations to use that capital. Before highlighting a couple of the recommendations, and HAC will include it all in its written comments, a much broader amount, I want to make a couple of general observations. As hard as it may be to admit, at times we all have to recognize the secondary housing market policy is and has historically been part of a system that locks in vastly different outcomes for people depending on the color of their skin and where they're born. I'll try to put it as bluntly as I can. Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and those folks living in markets that Fannie and Freddie's business models have never equitably served should know that the GSEs failing to offer fundamental big changes to their business models is going to continue to contribute to the likelihood that you're going to die earlier and more poor than the rest of America. And I know that sounds harsh, so please pardon me that, and it's not an individual on this call's effort, but for anyone paying attention to the extraordinary outcry of the last year since George Floyd was murdered, or the decade of work my organization and others have been doing in BIPOC and rural communities, if you are not part of a new solution, then you remain part of an old problem. These, in so many ways, have become times for big thoughts and not for incremental action. And so I recognize that making that point and that the practitioners who are doing so on these calls, it's not easy, right? HAC understands the complexities and difficulties of working in these communities, but HAC has been there with you every step of the way over the last decade, working on the promise and possibility of duty to serve. It is a tool we all can agree that can affect real, measurable change in these long overlooked and largely forgotten communities. We see duty to serve as a social justice issue. Our housing work is a social justice issue. In an era in which we are all leaning forward, I would hope, to combat racial and economic inequities, we're making it a national priority. We can use duty to serve to go past minimum promise levels of loan purchases and try to fundamentally shift outcomes. So here's my overarching takeaway from reading the plans for the next 3 years. They fall short of meeting this moment in history. And I know that's a really high bar and not written at this moment, but in the last months of the GSE's work. But the GSE staff working on the duty to serve should be lauded. They're pushing to eke out the modest investments described in these plans against, I'm sure, remarkable forces. And so I know how extraordinarily hard that must be, but more broadly, the GSEs could do more to share data on DTS outcomes and continue to focus on strong local partnerships. 2, they can set purchase targets much higher to have at least a measurable effect on rural markets. And 3, offer meaningful change to the core business models. On that first point, by the way, the data and partnerships, GSEs deserve lots of praise for the work of the last 3 years. and looking ahead, HAC would encourage FHFA to issue more detailed evaluations of the enterprise's work on duty to serve. Give us robust evaluation. It'll help policymakers and target markets understand the impact of this great tool, and it'll identify areas we can expand, improve, tailor. And with respect to the partnerships, HAC would encourage both the agency and the enterprises to redouble the efforts to engage national and community-based practitioners. We've got the expertise, connections, trust in rural and other communities to make duty to serve work. Let me get a little specific in my remaining time. Preservation of affordable rental housing in rural America remains an important piece of duty to serve, right? So it's pretty disappointing to see the generally low and inadequate purchase goals included in the plans. This goes across the board, and we'd encourage the enterprises to increase these goals. At least maybe get them to the high water mark from the last several years. Please, no backsliding. We will make more detailed recommendations on in our comment letter for this, but let me put a fine point on this for the enterprise's purchase goals for 515 properties. Both enterprises have spent the last several years working toward a subordination agreement with USDA to allow for the purchase of loans secured by 515 properties at risk of leaving the program. And according to the DTS plans, this was the reason for a lack of progress on 515 purchases. Freddie's done. Corey, great to hear your announcement yesterday. And Fannie has written that an agreement on their side will be in place this year. So how on earth does that explain that Fannie proposes to purchase 6 loans in 2022, 9 in 2023? And I got to say, it was at this point that I hurled my dog-eared copy of the plan across the room when it hit the wall that Freddie Mac proposes to purchase 1 loan in 2023 and 1 in 2024. We all know thousands of units are being lost every year. These commitments are woefully inadequate. HAC would encourage you to set the 515 purchase goals at least proportional to your market share. Please step up. Nobody can move the market like you all can. We're in crisis. We need that help right now. And additionally, the enterprises can invest in research that transforms 515. We can actually make it easier for all of us. The folks in the preservation community want that streamlining just as much as you. There are design flaws in the program, and USDA's entire portfolio could hang in the balance because of this. You know it, right? You just finished a couple of years of trying to negotiate the subordination agreement for the purchase of 515s. So let us encourage you to establish an independent council of rural preservation, or call it whatever you want, with the capacity to analyze the program, pull the experts together, develop solutions and best practices, make it easier for all of us. Some money spent on that would be extraordinarily valuable and have a great return on investment. And I would make a note that Fannie Mae's commitment to support technical assistance programs that do facilitate 515 has been great. That research work could pair with and build on the commitment. But without research funding behind this effort, USDA preservation is going to continue to be really hard. So additionally, the FHFA must allow the GSEs to invest in CDFIs. You've heard so many voices raised on this particular point. The enterprises are not and never will be on the ground in these local communities. That's okay, right? That they don't need to be there if you have partners that are there with capital to do the hard work of producing quality loans for their purchase. Yet
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. I appreciate that 5-minute warning, Toy. These CDFIs do not have the capacity to go through the process of becoming seller servicers all the time. They need more capital in order to address the barriers. The enterprises can pivot to support the CDFIs through direct investment. Simply put, FHFA is misinterpreting the law. You're preventing the public from receiving the full potential of duty to serve. You're denying equity investments in CDFIs, and it is incumbent on you to return to your interpretation of the law. We have several more comments. I just want to close with saying that in order to fulfill the promise of duty to serve, the enterprises should reevaluate your LIHTC investment goals. We acknowledge that 2020 was hard, but in our opinion, it's unacceptable to set targets below previous year activity when such an immense amount of wealth and housing value increases is occurring in several US markets. LIHTC investments should be reported for high needs rural regions so that we can see that impact in the places that need service the most. Thank you. Thank you for hosting the sessions. I really appreciate that. We truly appreciate the opportunity to speak to the yet untapped potential. I believe Mike said right at the beginning, or someone from the Freddie team, that we are just scratching the surface. The potential of duty to serve in rural communities is immense. Let's seize it.
Thank you, Mr. Nipsex. Our next speaker is Mr. Garth Ryman from the National Council of State Housing Agencies.
Thank you very much. And let me just say that I think David did a great job of leading these presentations. I would like to associate our organization with his remarks, and I think you'll hear echoes of many of them in my and other comments. So that's great. Thank you for holding these listening sessions on Fannie Mae's and Freddie Mac's underserved market plans and including NCSHA today. We also thank FHFA and the enterprises for their work on the Duty to Serve program and the new proposed plans. The National Council of State Housing Agencies is pleased to have this opportunity to deliver these remarks on behalf of the state housing finance agencies it represents. HFAs use tax-exempt housing bonds, housing credits, home, the Housing Trust Fund, Section 8, and many other federal and state programs to support the production and preservation of affordable housing. NCSHA supports the enterprise's focus on preserving Section 8 in USDA rural properties and promoting energy efficiency. We think its goals should be broader for preservation in many other geographic and market areas. We particularly think the enterprise should build in a focus on long-term affordability and ensuring that their debt products and investments require commitments of continued affordability for as long a period of time as possible. In awarding duty to serve credit for preservation, especially lending for acquisition deals, FHFA should make sure that the enterprise's activities provide affordability for the longest possible time, perhaps by providing more duty to serve credit for units or properties with commitments for longer affordability periods. In addition, we think FHFA should request that the enterprises provide evidence that properties are at risk based on local market conditions and property documents in order to receive the greatest duty to reserve credit for the debt or investment. In addition, we believe the enterprises can and should do substantially more than their plans indicate they intend to do. Of particular relevance for our discussion today, HFAs are also leaders in supporting affordable housing preservation through their lending programs and housing credit allocation, so I want to focus on some of the tools that they use. The housing credit is the primary source of capital available for preserving affordable rental housing. Many HFAs have set-asides and selection criteria in their housing credit allocation plans to encourage preservation and preservation-related activities, including rehabilitation. Because of the urgent need to preserve affordable rental housing and the vital role the housing credit plays in making preservation feasible, we urge FHFA to allow the enterprises to receive duty to serve credit for housing credit equity investments in affordable housing preservation transactions throughout the country in all the different markets and areas that need preservation support. And we encourage Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to include in their plans robust commitments to make significant housing credit equity investments for preservation throughout the country. Housing bonds are also a valuable tool for preservation financing, so we encourage FHFA to allow the enterprises to purchase tax-exempt housing bonds and to provide duty to serve credit for bond purchases or guarantees that support preservation. We support Fannie Mae's and Freddie Mac's plans to increase their preservation activities, including promoting preservation of properties financed with Section 8 project-based assistance, HUD's rental assistance demonstration, and USDA's Section 515 program. There are serious preservation issues and problems in all these areas that more robust GSE activity could really help. We also support the continued emphasis on small multifamily properties. These properties are important resources and have few debt and investment alternatives. Financing and preserving them is difficult, and the enterprises could help a great deal. We urge Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to partner actively with HFAs in their lending activities, working with them closely to offer the best possible lending terms, including continuing to investigate ways to streamline and increase affordable housing lending by delegating underwriting and servicing authority to qualified HFAs. While efforts to create such lending programs have been challenging and failed to succeed thus far, we still believe there is both the need to make them happen and the potential for them to succeed. Bond purchases and guarantees could help, even if creating broader delegated underwriting and servicing programs continues to be challenging. To summarize, preservation is vital, and we believe the enterprises can and should do more than their proposed plans contemplate, both in the number and types of activities, to help HFAs and other stakeholders expand their preservation activities. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Ryman. Our next speaker is Mr. Mark Kutlowitz from the Local Initiatives Support Corporation. Mr. Kutlowitz.
Hi, thank you. I'm Mark Kutlowitz, Senior Director of Policy for the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, or LIS. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's 2022 to 2024 duty to serve plans. Established in 1979, LISC is a national nonprofit housing and community development organization dedicated to helping community residents transform distressed neighborhoods into healthy and sustainable communities of choice and opportunity. LISC mobilizes corporate, government, and philanthropic support to provide local community development organizations with loans, grants, and equity investments, as well as technical and management assistance. Our organization has a nationwide footprint with local offices in 37 cities and a rural network. We invest approximately around $2 billion each year in these communities, and our work covers a wide range of activities. LISC will be submitting more specific written comments later this week, so I want to take this time to offer some overall feedback on the duty to serve plans today. We appreciate that part of FHFA's duty to serve outreach includes a focus on what activities and objectives address the most relevant obstacles to liquidity in underserved markets and considerations the enterprise should consider adding to their plans to address challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We think these are really critical questions, and we offer the following for your consideration. As a housing industry, we do indeed face huge market challenges, but these challenges are also a symptom of something bigger that isn't working. We know that in housing, our systems have long been set up to disadvantage some, but the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on people of low incomes and communities of color is showing us in real time just how deep the imbalances and inequalities are. And so we've made progress in the housing industry to address some of these broken parts of the system. And duty to serve certainly reflects some of the best of this progress. But in moments like this, we have to ask, how can we do more? As financial institutions that are the backbone of the safety and soundness of the American housing industry, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac continue to support the housing sector broadly. As we go forward, the safety and soundness of the industry demands that every institution, including the GSEs, work to address what's not working at the systems level and the disproportionate impact that has on already underserved communities. Duty to serve was authorized to create markets where there are gaps, and LISC believes that duty to serve should focus primarily on supporting and expanding transactions that improve affordable housing opportunities in underserved geographies and for underserved populations. The efforts of the GSEs pursuant to their duty to serve should be evaluated by the extent to which they facilitate more transactions to create or preserve these types of housing opportunities, particularly for households at the lowest end of the income spectrum. Unfortunately, many of the proposed activities fall short of that standard in the proposed plans. We strongly support the efforts of Congress and FHFA to expand the mission and regulation of the GSEs beyond the affordable housing goals that have been in place since 1992. And LIST has commented on previous duty to serve notices of proposed rulemaking and proposed underserved market plans. We, just like our other peers on the call today, applaud the thoughtful and creative approaches to underserved markets that are reflected, particularly the inclusion of affordable housing preservation programs. We also believe that the outreach of the GSEs and FHFA in developing the duty to serve plans has been commendable. And LIST believes that the type of transactions that will expand choice and opportunity for underserved areas and low-income households are often smaller, more labor-intensive, and have different credit risk profiles than is typical in conventional mortgage underwriting. Community development financial institutions or CDFIs such as LISC and others on the call today have worked in underserved communities for many years, have firsthand knowledge of local markets and partners. We are adept at mitigating the risks that are often inherent in investing in them. With our strong loan portfolios, CDFIs are natural partners for leveraging the GSE's liquidity and expanding responsible investment in these markets. So we suggest that beyond working with CDFIs for loan purchase and technical assistance activities, LIST recommends that FHFA determine whether the GSEs can make equity or equity-like investments in CDFIs through their duty to serve authority. Equity capital is critically important for CDFIs to be able to tackle some of the most challenging affordable housing problems in our nation. LISC encourages FHFA to release to the public a legal determination on this issue and mandate that the GSEs update their duty to service plans to include additional investment activities if FHFA determines it's eligible. Investment activities currently are just a small portion of duty to serve activities, although since 2017, FHFA has allowed each GSE to invest about $500 million annually in LIHTC projects. Any investments above $300 million a given year are required to be in areas that have been identified by FHFA as markets that have difficulty attracting investors. These investments are designed to preserve affordable housing, support mixed income housing, support supportive housing, or meet other affordable housing objectives. LIST recommends that FHFA adjust the current GSE LIHTC cap at least an inflationary factor, and that this extra investment authority be dedicated to underserved LIHTC markets, such as rural projects. These investments should also be eligible for duty to serve credit. This will allow the GSEs to increase their investment activities for projects difficult to finance, and is especially important as Congress has recently expanded the low-income housing tax credit program through the establishment of a 4% floor for bond finance deals and provided $2 billion in disaster housing credits. In addition, Congress is considering a further expansion of the program, which will increase the need for additional investors. We do note that it's challenging to review and make recommendations to FHFA on the GSE's duty to serve plans due to a lack of information on how activities are counted, a lack of standardized reporting between the GSEs, and insufficient public information on appropriate baselines. For instance, many LIHTC properties also have Section 8 operating subsidy, soft sources from state and local housing trust funds, and include inclusionary zoning units. This is due to how affordable housing is financed, since projects often require multiple capital and operating subsidies. For duty to serve purposes, it's unclear if a project would meet multiple activities if it met numerous duty to serve requirements, or if only one activity is counted based on a GSE or FHFA determination. Related, stakeholders are not able to discern if FHFA only counts units supported by relevant programs, or if a whole building is counted if a portion of the units include relevant duty to serve activities. The duty to serve plans for the GSEs do not include standardized methodologies for their goals, since some use unit counts while others count loans for their quantitative goals. It's difficult to understand what appropriate baselines for each goal should be, since public stakeholders aren't able to discern the overall market for many of the proposed activities. LIST recommends that FHFA explain to the public how duty to serve activity is accounted for in public reporting, and standardize goals between the GSEs as much as possible and as appropriate. In addition, we recommend that plans include information on the current market for each activity, so stakeholders are better able to discern the appropriateness of the proposed baselines. Lastly, we encourage FHFA to release its ratings of the GSE's previous duty to serve plan activity, since I don't believe this information is currently available. We also note that some activities from the first duty to serve plan cycle are not included in the proposed 3-year plan. This includes manufactured housing chattel loans, small multifamily loan purchases in rural communities, and others. We believe that FHFA should require the GSEs to publicly state in their duty to serve reporting why activities from previous cycles are not included in future plans, so the public has an understanding of the challenges and can work to address them. FHFA should also mandate that GSEs address how they will continue to support these underserved markets outside of the duty to serve program. Finally, LIST notes that many, if not all, the duty to serve activities incorporate racial equity concerns due to the affordable housing problems the GSEs are addressing, disproportionately impacting racial and ethnic minority households. While the authorizing statute for duty to serve does not require FHFA or the GSEs to address such issues, LISC encourages FHFA to explicitly incorporate racial equity components in all relevant duty to serve activities and reporting. This should include providing the public with disaggregated reporting and supporting research that shows how the duty to serve activity impacted racial and ethnic minorities. I thank you for the time to speak today, and we look forward to continuing to engage with the Federal Housing Finance Agency on duty to serve. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kutlowitz. Our next speaker is Ms. Ellen Lori Huffman from the National Housing Trust.
Thank you. And I am the one person with slides. Thank you. That's sort of in the middle of the slide deck. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present comments today to the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac on the enterprise's duty to serve plans for 2022 to 2024. Next slide, please. I'm Ellen Lori Hoffman, Senior Director of Federal Policy at the National Housing Trust. We are a national nonprofit organization committed to preserving and improving affordable rental housing, and we do that through policy, innovation, lending, real estate development, and energy solutions. Next slide, please. Before I start, I would like to associate myself with the previous speakers, with David, Garth, and Mark, who covered a variety of topics. And I have to say the National Housing Trust is in alignment with all of the points that they made. So for the record, I'd like to associate with that. I want to start by talking about the importance of the duty to serve itself. We really urge the Federal Housing Finance Agency to hold the enterprises accountable for their performance and to encourage them to undertake difficult challenges. And on that note, I will say that we were disappointed with the proposed plans for 2022 to 2024. We feel they're inadequate and do represent a retreat from the incremental progress that the first plan cycle made. And this is happening just as the previous speakers have noted, as the affordable housing crisis and the racial wealth gap have worsened. We think that the enterprises should be held to a far higher standard for more ambitious plans to make more tangible progress to serving the underserved markets. Some examples of how they could do that would be to encourage pilots, for FHFA to encourage pilots, to encourage longer affordability restrictions for preservation, and to allow equity investments in each market. And as Mark noted, it would be very helpful for the public trying to evaluate the enterprise's performance and plans to have better data and access to that data. So we encourage FHFA to release all the duty to serve market level ratings for the previous 3 years and the scores assigned to each objective to help encourage stronger plans, as well as the share of the total number of loans in each underserved market that the enterprises plan to purchase. That would help us evaluate how well they're doing. Next slide, please. And on the note of the future plans not being ambitious enough, I will note that many of the remarks that I'm going to be making from here on are very similar to those that I made back in October, because we have not seen progress on these points, so we will continue to make them. As LISC did, we would support and we would encourage entity level support to community development financial institutions. CDFIs provide flexible sources of pre-development and interim development funds for mission-aligned development organizations to purchase, rehabilitate, and preserve affordable housing. CDFIs are key partners in affordable housing preservation because they can take small amounts of public funding and leverage it with private capital. And we know that that dramatically increases the available funding for preservation. Next slide, please. The National Housing Trust has its own CDFI, NHT CDF, which provides early stage acquisition and development funding for developers to secure permanent financing, which is typically debt and low-income housing tax credits. We lend to preserve or create about 2,000 units per year, and the majority of our loans are taken out by loans from the enterprises. We know that CDFIs like NHT CDF are the only ones providing the early stage capital needed for the enterprises to deploy their products. Next slide, please. But many CDFIs, despite the importance of them for preservation, they still lack the access to capital markets supported by the housing finance system, which causes some CDFI housing lenders to experience liquidity challenges. And this is particularly problematic in the aftermath of the pandemic. The enterprises could provide CDFIs with liquidity for their lending activities, which would help spur affordable housing development and preservation, help address the needs of low income and disadvantaged communities, and increase support for technical assistance and training to help build the capacity of these lenders working in difficult to serve markets. Next slide, please. So we urge FHFA to approve entity level support in Treasury certified CDFIs that are working to preserve affordable housing and allow them to receive duty to serve credit for these activities. The enterprises can provide capital or enhance the CDFI's ability to raise or deploy capital. And duty to serve credit could be received by making direct investments in or loans to CDFIs as they were previously authorized to do. Next slide, please. I'm going to pivot now to talk about the low-income housing tax credit and then the need for equity investments in affordable housing preservation. Given the critical need to preserve affordable rental housing, which is really greater than ever coming out of the pandemic, we urge FHFA to allow the enterprises to be eligible for duty to serve credit for housing credit equity investments, as well as mortgage purchases in the affordable housing preservation transactions. As has been previously mentioned, the housing credit is the primary source of capital available for preservation, and duty to serve credit for housing credit equity investments could provide greater liquidity for affordable housing preservation. Next slide, please. We also recognize the importance of non-housing credit equity investments. The ability to facilitate a more liquid secondary market for preserving affordable housing is heavily dependent on the availability of equity investments. So we urge FHFA to authorize the enterprises to provide non-LIHTC equity investments, which would help provide capital specifically for unsubsidized rental housing serving low and moderate income renters. Next slide, please. And a few words about this unsubsidized housing stock. It is disappearing, and this is more true than ever as we see our economy becoming more and more divided into sort of the haves and have-nots. Unsubsidized affordable units comprise a significant portion of the rental housing stock, but they're being lost due to obsolescence or upgrading to higher rents. We've seen rent prices skyrocket in the aftermath of the pandemic, and that could certainly accelerate these losses. But even before the pandemic, the markets were failing to produce new units that are affordable to low and moderate income households. Capital is needed to preserve this portfolio. It serves renters who are not eligible for federal rental assistance or housing credits, or who are unable to access this assistance. Next slide, please. Private equity vehicles and REITs are the current sources of equity capital addressing the needs of low and moderate income renters, but both of these channels are limited in number and they're inconsistent in their commitment to long-term affordability of rental properties. The enterprises have a role to play in providing the reliability and the structure to respond to these needs. Next slide, please. So we encourage FHFA to provide more duty to serve credit for units that are affordable to lower income residents at 80% of area median income or below. And in providing non-LIHTC equity investments, FHFA could request that the enterprises provide evidence that a property is at risk based on local market conditions and the ownership structure in order to receive the greatest duty to serve credit for the investment. And I would add to that long-term commitment to affordability as well. Next slide, please. Thank you for this opportunity to comment. We appreciate your consideration and look forward to continuing to work with FHFA and both of the enterprises. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Lori Hoffman. Our next speaker is Mr. David Sanchez from the National Community Stabilization Trust.
Thanks, Toy. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And I want to associate myself with the comments of David Lipschitz with just my compliments to the FHFA and Fannie and Freddie staff who are here today, who really make the hard work of duty to serve possible. My name is David Sanchez, and I'm the Director of Research and Development at the National Community Stabilization Trust, or NCST. We're a national nonprofit that supports families and communities by restoring single-family homes, strengthening neighborhoods, and increasing access to sustainable, affordable homeownership. We do this by facilitating the sales of distressed homes to community-based partners, by providing technical assistance and capital for single-family rehab, and by conducting federal policy that is grounded in our knowledge of distressed housing markets. Today, I'm going to focus in detail on Fannie Mae's proposed distressed properties objectives and to Freddie Mac's corresponding lack of objectives in the distressed properties market. However, I'd like to begin with broader remarks on the as yet unfulfilled promise of duty to serve. While the duty to serve program is still in its infancy, the enterprise's accomplishments during their first plan cycles demonstrate that increasing liquidity and investments in these underserved markets is indeed possible, if difficult. Given today's housing supply shortages, rising home prices and rents, and persistent economic and racial inequality, the duty to serve program is more important than ever. We believe that FHFA needs to make duty to serve a central priority for the agency and for the enterprises. Ultimately, FHFA needs to evaluate every policy decision through the lens of its impact on underserved markets, affordable housing, and community investment. Unfortunately, FHFA has made a series of policy decisions that make it much more difficult for the enterprises to achieve their statutory duty to serve. We call on FHFA to immediately revisit 3 sets of policies. First, we encourage FHFA to revisit its pricing and capital policies. FHFA should start by reducing or eliminating the loan level pricing adjustments, or LLPAs, which charge additional fees to lower wealth borrowers and those with less than pristine credit. FHFA should also reconsider its adverse market refinance fee and the unnecessarily large capital buffers in its 2020 capital rule, both of which unnecessarily increase the cost of credit. Second, we urge FHFA to allow the enterprises to make equity or equity-like investments that support their affordable housing mission. This could include both investments in high-capacity CDFIs as well as investments in particular transactions that support the production or preservation of affordable housing. While certain limits on the GSE's investment authorities may be prudent, we encourage FHFA to be transparent about any limitations it places on these activities. Third, FHFA must allow and encourage the enterprises to pursue pilots that test new strategies for serving underserved markets in its upcoming new products rule. As FHFA re-examines these larger policy decisions, we also encourage the agency to continue to build on the transparency of the duty to serve program. First and foremost, we encourage FHFA to release its 2018 and 2019 ratings at both the market and the objective levels. Second, we encourage FHFA to enhance the public use database to include loan level flags at the objective level. Third, we encourage FHFA to continue publishing the enterprise's quarterly and annual duty to serve reports, as well as its own loan purchase dashboards. Finally, we encourage both FHFA and the enterprises to consider ways to work with stakeholders in the underserved markets outside of these public listening sessions. While the enterprise's proposed plans contain a number of objectives that will positively affect underserved markets, the plans lack the ambition that were present in the enterprise's first-year plans, and they fail to meet the moment. Among the stronger proposed elements included in the proposed plans are commitments at both enterprises to purchase loans to preserve property supported by the USDA Section 515 program, to purchase loans and provide technical assistance for high-needs rural areas or populations, and to purchase manufactured housing community loans with tenant pad lease protections. However, each of these activities would be stronger if the enterprises set higher corresponding loan purchase targets. While there are many shortcomings in the proposed plans, perhaps the most significant is that neither Fannie Mae nor Freddie Mac proposes objectives related to manufactured housing titled as chattel. Enterprise purchases of chattel loans would help low-income consumers access lower-priced financing and, critically, could bolster the consumer protections available in this market. We believe that the enterprises can serve the chattel market safely and that there's no excuse not to do so. Ultimately, we believe that the enterprises should be required to revise their proposed plans substantially before they are approved by FHFA later this year. I'll now turn my attention to distressed properties markets, which are NCST's primary policy focus. We applaud Fannie Mae's inclusion of 2 distressed property objectives in its proposed plans, and we encourage Freddie Mac to reverse its decision not to include activities in this market. By providing liquidity in the distressed properties market, each enterprise can help prevent vacancy and neighborhood blight, strengthen cities and communities, and provide additional opportunities for affordable homeownership. These activities are particularly important given the impact of the pandemic on communities. Close to 2 million borrowers still remain delinquent on their mortgages, and many communities of color, including so-called middle neighborhoods where many residents have GSE mortgages, have been hard hit by both COVID and the virus's economic impact. Fannie Mae's proposed distressed properties activities focus on research, outreach, or product development to encourage neighborhood stabilization and owner-occupant purchases of distressed properties. Unfortunately, Fannie Mae's plan lacks detail about what the enterprise intends to do over the next 3 years. This lack of detail makes it extremely difficult for FHFA and outside stakeholders to judge the ambition and likely impact of these activities. As Fannie Mae revises and begins implementing its plan, NCST encourages Fannie to pursue concrete actions in 3 areas. The first is access to acquisition and renovation capital. Access to affordable and stable capital is a constant need for nonprofits and other mission-minded entities that acquire and rehabilitate distressed properties, and it has never been more important than during today's inventory crisis, where rapid home price appreciation and legions of cash buyers are making it harder than ever for these nonprofits to compete in the acquisition and rehab market. During its first plan, Fannie Mae piloted a product that would allow nonprofits to use Fannie Mae's acquisition rehab mortgages, but the pilot was ultimately unsuccessful for reasons that seem solvable. We urge Fannie Mae to try again. The second is REO property repairs. Fannie Mae reports that its initiatives to repair a greater share of its REO properties are helpful in encouraging owner-occupant purchases of these properties. We would appreciate more data that substantiates this claim. In addition, we encourage Fannie Mae to ensure that its property repair programs are making all needed upgrades to major systems that can reasonably be anticipated in the next few years, because protecting first-time home buyers and low and moderate income families from large capital outlays in the first few years of homeownership is critically important. Third, we encourage FHFA and Fannie Mae to closely monitor the success of Fannie Mae's Community First REO sales platform, which provides a first-look purchase opportunity to mission-minded developers. As NCST knows firsthand, the success of this first-look sales program depends on Fannie Mae's policies regarding property sales prices and the ability of prospective purchasers to access or inspect properties. Another important ingredient is providing technical assistance to nonprofit rehabbers, as well as carefully monitoring and tracking their work and outcomes. Finally, I would like to comment briefly on the enterprise's proposed residential economic diversity activities. While it is good that both enterprises have committed to supporting loan purchases in this market, neither has proposed ambitious goals given their past purchase volumes, and Freddie Mac's goals are especially weak. During the first plan cycle, the impacts of each enterprise's residential economic diversity related policy enhancements and research were mixed. Unfortunately, the proposed plans are even less ambitious in this regard. While the existing duty to serve rules extra credit for residential economic diversity is well-intentioned, it is clear that more must be done to incent the enterprises to equitably serve households and communities of color. In 2020, 3.06% of Fannie Mae's owner-occupied loan purchases were to Black borrowers. At Freddie Mac, the percentage was 3.28%. This share has not exceeded 5% at either enterprise in any year since conservatorship began. Federal law includes a provision whereby the FHFA director may recommend to Congress additional underserved markets to which duty to serve should apply. And FHFA should consider asking Congress for authority to focus on homeownership for communities of color and duty to serve. In the meantime, we hope that as the enterprises revise their plans, they propose additional activities that meaningfully advance racial equity within the 3 underserved markets. thank you again for the opportunity to comment on the enterprise's proposed duty to serve plans.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Our next speaker is Mr. Andrew Spafford from the Preservation of Affordable Housing.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
So my name is Andrew Spafford. I'm providing comments on behalf of Preservation of Affordable Housing, or POA, a national nonprofit affordable housing developer, owner, and operator. We appreciate the opportunity to share our input on the enterprise's proposed 2022 to 24 duty to serve underserved markets plans. Before I start my comments, I do want to state for the record, as some of the previous speakers have done, POA's support for the comments offered by all of the prior speakers, and especially for the calls made by David, Mark, and others for more explicit attention to the racial equity impacts of the proposed duty to serve plans. POA's primary mission is the preservation of at-risk affordable housing. Over the last 20 years, we have preserved over 100 affordable housing communities, totaling nearly 12,000 affordable rental units. We make extensive use of the subsidy programs targeted by the enterprise's duty to serve plans, notably the low-income housing credit, project-based Section 8 rental assistance, and state and local affordable housing programs, and we are intensely focused on ensuring our communities are as energy efficient as possible. POA values the enterprise's critical contributions in support of preservation efforts across the country and the role of the duty to serve infrastructure in that regard. And we appreciate the care with which they have crafted these proposed duty to serve plans. Within the context of that appreciation for the enterprise's role in our work, we do have a number of comments on the plans. I will touch on 6 main areas of comment. First, in general, like previous speakers, we support stronger loan purchase targets in nearly every project category. And we would encourage the enterprises to set their targets at least at or above their 3-year averages. Even in light of recent strong performance in many categories, the need for preservation work is growing in absolute terms, especially as more and more low-income housing credit and rural development projects approach the end of their affordability restrictions each year and in the coming years. Second, we support the enterprise's continued focus on loan purchases for projects with project-based Section 8 rental assistance, where increased competition from self-financed, profit-motivated buyers has challenged preservation purchasers relying on agency financing. In the current market, speed and flexibility are at a premium, and we encourage the enterprises to continue to prioritize product enhancements in this market and to delegate more discretion and flexibility to their lender partners to reduce the delays associated with the need for waivers of rigid agency underwriting guidelines. Third, we also strongly support the enterprise's aggressive support for preservation work in the LIHTC inventory, where preservation needs continue to grow. In this space, we support Fannie Mae's intent to expand its targeting to deliver liquidity to LIHTC projects later in their life cycle, including during the extended use period, but we are concerned that this liquidity could actually support buyers who intend to convert to market after the extended use restrictions expire. And we urge Fannie Mae and FHFA to consider how these loans can be targeted to support long-term preservation actors. Separately, we also support both enterprises' continued participation in the LIHTC equity market, and we would support much higher targets for each enterprise. Looking beyond the proposed duty to serve plans, we continue to hope FHFA will reconsider its current restriction to rural LIHTC investments to allow the enterprises to support other LIHTC projects which may not be as well supported by other investors, including projects that are smaller, more complex, or serve more challenging populations. On a related note, as the LIHTC market continues to evolve in the coming years, we urge FHFA to ensure that the enterprises are able to play an appropriate role in ensuring there is adequate demand for LIHTC investment across all markets and project types. In particular, proposed changes to the Community Reinvestment Act regulations could have significant implications for investment demand for the credit. and proposed legislative changes mentioned earlier by Mark could significantly increase the total volume of credits available for investment, which would result in lower demand, expanded supply, and reduced equity pricing, which could warrant additional enterprise participation to stabilize this crucial capital source. Beyond the LIHTC context, we strongly support the enterprise's expanded focus on the preservation of the rural development housing portfolio, including ongoing engagement with USDA. This part of the inventory is facing a looming tidal wave of affordability loss, and it is crucial that all stakeholders, including the enterprises, continue to work aggressively to develop preservation solutions. We would have liked to see loan purchase targets for some other product types that were part of past duty to serve plans, but don't appear in the current proposed plans. In particular, we strongly support both enterprises' efforts to develop and promote products to support energy and water efficiency improvements in affordable multifamily properties. And we would want to see measurable performance targets for those loans, in addition to the proposed outreach and studies. Similarly, the enterprise's mezzanine debt products represent a potentially important source of gap financing, including for projects now struggling with COVID-related construction cost escalation. We encourage the enterprises to add plan activities related to these gap financing programs, including both product enhancements and quantitative performance targets. Finally, we support both enterprises' emphases on preservation of affordable housing in so-called opportunity areas within their residential economic diversity activities. In that context, we would urge both enterprises to do more to support the preservation of existing affordable but unrestricted housing, otherwise referred to as NOAA, or naturally occurring affordable housing. In particular, the enterprises should expand these loan purchase goals to include loans for existing NOAA properties that adopt new affordability restrictions. And because the lack of affordable equity is probably the biggest barrier to successful NOAA preservation transactions, we continue to hope that FHFA will authorize the enterprises to provide equity investments in workforce housing as proposed in Fannie Mae's original 2018 to 21 duty to serve plan. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments.
Thank you, Mr. Spafford. So now this brings us to halfway through our session, and so we'll begin our break session period right now. It's 2:13. Let's resume back at 2:23. Okay. All right, so now back with the second half of our speakers. Our first speaker on the second half is Mr. Vince Wang from Grounded Solutions Network.
Thank you, Toy. I'd like also thank FHFA and for hosting these listening sessions and taking the feedback of stakeholders seriously. I'm Vince Wang from Grounded Solutions Network, which is a national nonprofit membership organization of over 200 members. Our members are nonprofits and local governments, all committed to creating and stewarding housing with lasting affordability. Hence, we predominantly support shared equity programs, including CLTs and below market rate programs. Our comments are going to focus on shared equity activities proposed by the GSEs in their UMPs, But before doing so, we have some general comments to share. Generally speaking, these proposed plans fall very short from setting significant loan purchase goals, and the proposed activities lack innovation, deeper and more intensive action, and the real investment that would be needed to meaningfully reach these underserved markets. Ultimately, FHFA needs to rescind these incentives, which took place under the previous FHFA director, to enable those GSEs to pursue more aggressive duty to serve activities. This should include revising the capital regulation to encourage loan purchases in underserved markets and repealing loan level rise adjustments on underserved markets, which are antiquated. FHFA should also not finalize the new products role, and instead creating an interim final role that it will encourage pilots to better serve underserved markets. And lastly, FHFA should honor the intent of the statute and permit targeted equity investment to reach underserved markets. FHFA should not approve UMPs that resemble the current proposals, and should act quickly to enable the GSEs to develop plans that would have meaningful and significant impact on the underserved markets, including shared equity homeownership. Next, FHFA must require that final UMPs and the performance reports entail standardized measures across both GSEs for baseline metrics when possible, as well as loan purchase goals. There are so many apples and oranges comparisons throughout the plans that it's impossible for stakeholders to understand the relative performance of each GSE. Finally, our last comment for FHFA is what happened to reevaluating activities for extra credit. Our understanding that for each UMP period, FHFA is to consider extra credit, and we believe that stakeholders should have an opportunity to provide input. We believe that FHFA should consider addressing racial disparities in homeownership, especially those caused by COVID-19 for extra credit. Shared equity model should be prioritized for advancing Black homeownership. Next, I will comment on the GSE's proposed activities for shared equity homeownership. I will start with loan purchase goals. Fannie and especially Freddie's goals are way too low. Freddie's loan purchase objectives do not increase liquidity, and Freddie only plans to conduct other modest activities in the first year of the plan period, which won't result in meaningfully increasing access to mortgages. This signals that Freddie is no longer planning to invest in addressing the liquidity challenges for this underserved market of shared equity borrowers, which is unacceptable. Freddie should be setting goals of purchasing at a minimum 50% more year over year. Fannie should increase their loan purchases goals to be 25 to 50% year over year. These goals are reasonable. For one, the historically low interest rates are resulting in shared equity borrowers refinancing at far greater rates. Second, Freddie had an artificially low baseline because they needed to fix something in a CLT product offering, which they recently did, so loans can be delivered. Fannie's baseline was artificially low because they did not have a system to track loans that met the definition of shared equity. So it's likely that more loans were delivered than reported. Third, the administration has signaled clearly that housing is getting into the infrastructure bill, which should result in substantial resources that will scale the shared equity fields, providing greater opportunity for loan purchases. Now, let me comment on other proposed activities. We have worked with both GSEs to develop the model deed restricted documents referenced in their proposed UMPs, because we agree that providing model legal documents is a highly valuable activity to begin to standardize the field and improve liquidity. The issue is that adoption of the MDR is going to be varied, as we need to educate and convince local and state governments, city attorneys, and program staff about the benefits of the model and how it will enable best practices, optimize loan performance, and increase access to financing. The proposed activities by both GSEs are insufficient to support even modest adoption of the MDR. The GSEs have supported the creation of the MDR, but they are falling very short on sending these efforts too. They must invest in a comprehensive and effective strategy to get MDR adopted and implemented. Both GSEs should invest the resources intensively during the entire UMP period to, one, conduct strategic outreach and education to a more diverse group of stakeholders, such as consultants who work with cities to adopt inclusion zoning policies, and the state to support organizations for below market rate programs. Two, develop training to broad array of stakeholders. And three, provide technical assistance to programs adopting the model documents. Next, the GSEs should incorporate into their UMPs clearer plans for updating their selling guides, including making a separate section for shared equity programs using ground leases and those deed restrictions. Additionally, both GSEs should incorporate the activities that incentivize the adoption of the MDR, such as providing better pricing on loans, adding a guarantor execution option for mortgage delivery, or waiving particular guide requirements when using the MDR. Turning now to the other proposed activities, we have worked with Fannie to develop the certification referenced in the proposed plan. We strongly believe that this certification is addressing one of the most relevant obstacles to increasing liquidity for shared equity borrowers, as lenders do not have their time or expertise to review aspects of their affordable housing programs or their legal documents. In fact, we support this activity so much that we believe that FHFA and the GSEs should work together to find a way that the certification could be utilized by both GSEs lenders to minimize lender burden and streamline the lending. Freddie only proposes to accept a different certification that they helped to develop in Florida, which will not increase liquidity in overall shared equity markets. Their only other activity is to publish a guide update and to add guarantor execution option for delivery of CLT mortgages. We support this, but these activities are widely insufficient to increase access to mortgage financing for shared equity borrowers. We recommend a period of activities that would improve their duty to serve performance and advance duty to serve goals. This should include finishing the research necessary to confidently size the market. Fannie worked with us to conduct an inclusion housing census and document the number of shared equity homes in these types of programs. In this UMP, both GSEs should support a census of shared equity programs that includes documenting the number of shared equity homes they have in portfolio for CLTs and other nonprofits. At that juncture, the universe of single-family shared equity homes in the US will be well estimated. This research is vital so GSEs don't set loan volume goals too low due to insufficient information on the scale of the market. Next, both GSEs need to align leasehold appraisal methods. Fannie has a specific section of their selling guide that includes an explicit methodology for appraisers to use, which provides clarity, standardization, and consistency across shared equity transactions. Freddie, unfortunately, leaves the approach to calculating the value of the leasehold estate up to appraisers, which does not work for the field. Freddie should align their selling guide on appraisals of leasehold estates to Fannie's selling guide. Additionally, both GSEs should support the creation of 2 virtual trainings for practitioners, one on mortgage financing and other on legal documents. Many practitioners do not understand what the second market is, whether a loan offered by their partnering lenders is conventional, and why the terms in their legal documents matter to financial institutions and GSEs. However, practitioners have a very critical role to play to increase lender participation and promote liquidity for their home buyers and owners. Grounded Solutions Virtual Training Institute has been attended by 650 practitioners to date this year, so we can help the GSEs to develop and deliver these trainings. Also, the GSEs should support the updating of the
training.
Thank you, Toy. Also, the GSEs should support the updating of the model ground lease in 2023 based upon the learnings from the model deed restriction adoption and implementation. This will remove the burden of lenders needing to review these complex legal documents and streamline shared equity across ground lease and deed restricted models. Lastly, if FHFA does what it needs to do to permit equity investment and pilots, both should be used to expand shared equity opportunities and increase liquidity in the field. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to working with FHFA and the GSEs to develop more robust plans.
Thank you, Mr. Wang. Now, next speaker is Mr. Greg Hawkins from the Rocky Mountain Institute.
Thanks, Toy, and thank you all for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Greg Hopkins. I'm a manager at RMI, formerly Rocky Mountain Institute, a 40-year-old independent nonprofit working to secure a clean, prosperous, and zero carbon future for all. My comments today will focus on the enterprise's proposed duty to serve plans related to single-family energy efficiency and green mortgages, and why this is the moment they must think bigger and act more boldly with FHFA's leadership and support. You have and will hear many voices during these sessions calling for more ambition from the enterprises in addressing the affordability crisis and systemic racial inequities, and rightly so. We echo those calls, but there may be fewer voices speaking about another interrelated and increasingly obvious challenge that will exacerbate those issues if we do not course correct, and that is the climate crisis. As the most recent report from Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies notes, the climate crisis has made improving the energy efficiency and resiliency of American housing more urgent than ever. FHFA and the enterprises have a fiduciary responsibility to facilitate these improvements at scale, to better support and protect LMI families in underserved markets and beyond, in addition to protecting their own portfolio against what may be its greatest exogenous threat. The climate crisis is intensifying and its impacts are already being felt across the housing market, with $95 billion in damages last year alone. At this very moment, our country is experiencing record-setting heat and unprecedented droughts. We all watched 2 weeks ago as an extraordinary climate-driven heat wave scorched the Pacific Northwest, causing nearly 200 deaths in Oregon and Washington as people struggled to stay cool inside their homes and elsewhere. These are not coincidences, and these trends will get worse. We know these impacts disproportionately harm the underserved and vulnerable communities that Duty to Serve is designed to support. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us that failure to cut greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030 will mean substantially increasing risk in the years ahead. We need to do much of the heavy lifting on this course correction over the next 8.5 years. And so this upcoming 3-year Duty to Serve period is a critical window for the enterprises to get started. Inaction or even minimal action will only exacerbate these risks for the housing stock, the mortgage and insurance industries, the enterprises, and particularly underserved communities. The scale and urgency of the challenge requires all hands on deck. Every agency, institution, and market actor must do its part within its sphere of influence. And for FHFA and the enterprises, that sphere is enormous. Household energy use accounts for 1/5 of all US emissions, but it is not nearly on track to meet climate targets given a lack of information transparency, market signals and incentives, and scalable, low-cost project financing solutions, much of which FHFA and the enterprises can correct. Fortunately, the solutions at your disposal can also create new business and market opportunities while reducing energy burdens and improving health and safety outcomes for underserved populations. But the enterprise's proposed Duty to Serve plans for 2022 to 24 do not go nearly far enough. Duty to Serve offers a powerful mechanism to put LMI households and underserved markets first in this transition. Relative to the enterprise's original 2018 to 2020 plans and outcomes, the new plans lack ambition on this front. Fundamentally, the next 3 years is not the time for emphasizing more research and analysis. It's the time to meaningfully commit resources to actually testing and implementing solutions on the ground that will provide needed access to capital for higher performing, more resilient homes for many more LMI borrowers. To get more specific, our comments offer 5 high-level areas of feedback on the proposed plans for energy efficiency and single-family green mortgages. First, unbiased data and automation. Both enterprises' emphasis on data collection and automation is encouraging and necessary, but it would be concerning if this data is only captured for homes that already have improvements or green certifications as drafted, which would bias towards higher-end homes and wealthier borrowers. Existing tools like NREL's ResStock database, as mentioned in Fannie Mae's plans, can be leveraged to auto-populate baseline home-specific energy data for all homes to trigger and streamline the adoption of green mortgage products where that capital for improvements is most needed. The enterprises should coordinate these data integration efforts with the UAD redesign and UMD efforts underway. We urge the enterprises not to spend 3 more years researching and analyzing this data, but rather to start testing its application and impact on driving product adoption. Second, bolder green mortgage purchase targets. For context, as Fannie Mae's plans mention, there are an estimated 36 million owned LMI households in the US. In the proposed plans, the enterprises each set green mortgage purchase targets on the order of 200 to 500 loans nationwide. In Fannie Mae's case, these new targets are no higher than their 2019 targets. We urge FHFA to make concerted efforts to streamline the Duty to Serve reporting requirements in ways that will enable the enterprises to achieve significantly more ambitious green mortgage purchase targets, at a minimum increasing to 5% of all loans for LMI borrowers by 2024, building on their work to date and other proposed activities. Doing so can catalyze a much needed shift towards a market where green mortgages are a standard offering in all enterprise-backed transactions. Third, inclusive MBS and green bond frameworks. Both enterprises recently launched single-family green MBS programs, which is commendable, and their plans refer to these programs. The next duty to serve period offers an opportunity to expand the frameworks of these MBS programs beyond just new construction and solar financing to include duty to serve eligible loans for efficiency improvements on existing homes in these bond offerings. This would create pathways for more LMI borrowers to realize the benefits of improving their home's performance and tapping into a virtuous capital cycle through the secondary markets over time. This expansion should not wait until 2024 as proposed in the plans. Fourth, launch equity-driven pilots. As an example of how the enterprises could shift focus and add resources for on-the-ground action, they could design and execute a pilot or incentive program targeting a few of the highest energy-burdened zip codes in the US, where first-time LMI homebuyers are offered green mortgage products combined with down payment assistance and other services. Such a program should be designed in collaboration with community partners and could involve alternative credit scoring methods as well as counseling resources, leveraging the enterprise's outreach and relationship building activities over the last few years. Efforts like these can then inform scalable strategic initiatives to shrink the homeownership gap and support sustained homeownership. Fifth, and finally, expand duty to serve credit. FHFA should consider amending the duty to serve regulation mid-cycle to allow any and all types of upgrades financed by green mortgages to qualify for duty to serve credit, given the many benefits for LMI borrowers. Doing so would better align with the enterprise's existing product requirements and would facilitate their duty to serve reporting. Updated duty to serve criteria should include increasingly important resilience upgrades and should explicitly add electrification upgrades given extensive new research on the direct health benefits of replacing combustion-based equipment in homes with clean electric alternatives. Electrification upgrades can also offer immediate financial benefits of lowering monthly costs and supporting mortgage payments, especially for many rural households. To enable the enterprises to produce more ambitious duty to serve plans this year, FHFA should not finalize the pending new products rulemaking and instead should promulgate an interim final rule that encourages pilots, which are essential in reaching underserved markets. FHFA should also promulgate an interim final rule that revises the capital regulation to encourage loan purchases in underserved markets and that repeals antiquated loan level price adjustments in underserved markets. And lastly, we believe FHFA should hold the enterprises to a far higher standard for making progress and should not approve duty to serve plans resembling their current proposals later this year without incorporating greater ambition. In closing, FHFA and the enterprises should be leading efforts to mitigate the disproportionate and increasing impacts of the climate crisis on LMI households and underserved communities across America, primarily by increasing access to capital for higher performing, more resilient homes. The enterprise's green mortgage products offer a scalable existing tool to deliver this while improving affordability and health and safety outcomes. As part of the whole of government approach to addressing the climate crisis, we urge FHFA and the enterprises to take decisive action to meaningfully develop and scale this market at a critical time over the next few years, serving the borrowers who need it most first. RMI and a diverse coalition of other experts, including the DOE and its national laboratories, stand ready and willing to support with technical and other assistance in this space however we can. Thank you for your time, and thank you all for continuing your important work on duty to serve.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. All right, our next speaker is Ms. Garon Levi.
Good afternoon. Thank you for convening this listening session on the enterprises, underserved market plans, and specifically on affordable housing preservation. The National Community Reinvestment Coalition and its grassroots member organizations are actively engaged in the conversations around affordable housing and access to home ownership and the wealth building opportunity it can create. At the outset, the enterprises must exhibit greater market leadership than is reflected in their proposed underserved market plans. If they are to do so, if they are going to indeed exhibit greater leadership around affordable housing preservation, it is critical that FHFA itself revisit a number of the agency's policies in recent years that hamstring the companies, have and will stymie the ability of the enterprises to execute robust affordable housing programs, including those around affordable housing preservation. Several of the agency's policies undermine the ability of the enterprises to go beyond simply providing support to the underserved markets and living up to their charter mission, and to actually provide leadership, quote unquote, which the statute itself requires. Given the scale of affordable housing challenges in the underserved markets, FHFA should fully consider and disclose of the agency's public policies, as well as their interpretive guidances and other directions on the ability of the enterprises to provide leadership in the underserved markets. It has become far more common to learn how FHFA policies are impacting the enterprise's affordable housing activities by reviewing the company's SEC filings. The December 2020 10K filings revealed, for example, that based on FHFA's interpretive guidance, which aren't public, Fannie was out of compliance with the January 2020 amendments to their preferred stock purchase agreements that limit so-called higher risk loans. Freddie also revealed that risk appetite constraints, quote unquote, may make it difficult for the company to meet their affordable housing goals in the future. Another example is the restriction on the ability of the enterprises to dispose of any asset below market value without prior consent. This also limits their ability to donate properties and partner with community groups that are undertaking critical revitalization work in distressed communities. In short, FHFA should take immediate steps to drop the program and product constraints in the January amendments to the enterprise's PSPAs, as well as other conservatorship policies and guidances that inhibit safe and sound affordable housing activities. The agency should also immediately reopen and revisit and revise the bank-like capital requirements imposed by FHFA's December capital rule, as well as other pricing policies in order to encourage loan purchases in the underserved markets, and particularly affordable housing preservation. Revising these policies will also advance the overall goals of the Biden administration around racial equity and Black home ownership. Some FHFA policies are having a disproportionate impact on access and affordability for borrowers and communities of color. I do want to note that we are encouraged by the acting director's recent announcements and the new policy statement on fair lending, as well as the newly issued orders on fair lending reporting. It signals that the agency is moving in a direction that will ferret out how the agency's policies and the activities of the enterprises are impacting communities of color, and will take steps to address these issues. Overall, we have urged FHFA to provide more visibility into the agency's own impact analysis of its various capital, liquidity, pricing, and product policies on borrowers and communities of color. We are also opposed to the agency finalizing a new products rule that limits the enterprise's ability to undertake pilot programs around affordable housing preservation and the underserved markets. It should be noted that the enterprises have a strong history of developing safe and sound affordable loan products that respond to gaps in the market. The need to meet the market challenges around affordable housing preservation could benefit from a number of these past products, including the homestay mortgage product, location efficient mortgage products, modifiable mortgages, working mortgages, a long list of Native American mortgage products, some of which the enterprises are offering. Again, the enterprises have also offered different construction lending products that could really aid affordable housing preservation, including nonprofit developer renovation products, bridge loan products, acquisition development loan products, sweat equity products, developer lines of credit, and credit enhanced municipal bond products. A stronger product, a portfolio of loan products and pilots at the enterprises would aid affordable housing preservations, as well as more, stronger, and reasonable loan purchase targets. We also urge the agencies to permit more targeted equity investments to reach the underserved markets. This can permit greater and more consistent investment in tertiary markets, smaller cities, and legacy cities, for example, which lack sufficient investment in affordable housing preservation. The enterprises have also provided greater support for nonprofit capacity building than they are now, including for CDFIs, for example, as early investors as a way to attract other investors, and in their stock as non-controlling owners. The enterprises should undertake more targeted investments aimed at capacity building than what is reflected in the current plans. Overall, we would like to see far more rigor in the underserved market plans overall, and particularly with regard to affordable housing preservation. We have been concerned that many of the baselines set for loan purchase targets have not been reasonable or realistic. We have seen the enterprises far exceed some of these loan purchase benchmarks that have been set. And that indicates that the baselines are not realistic. The enterprises should do a better job of making their market forecast transparent so that stakeholders can better understand how benchmarks are being set. We would also like to see, with regard to affordable housing preservation, the enterprises set reasonable and realistic loan purchase benchmarks that support purchase and rehabilitation financing of distressed properties. This is a significant area of need, and rehabilitating existing inventory is an area that could help mitigate some of the affordability, the affordability crises in the country. Thank you for providing this opportunity to comment on affordable housing preservation, and that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Levi. Our next speaker is Althea Arnold from the Stewards for Affordable Housing for the Future.
Good afternoon. My name is Althea Arnold, and I'm Senior Vice President of Policy for the Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, or SAFE. Thank you for the opportunity to share some brief comments on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's proposed duty to serve plans. First, I want to just echo many of the other speakers and the need for more ambition in addressing racial equity in the plans, and for more transparent and robust data on the impact of the duty to serve. SAFE is a collaborative of 13 exemplary multi-state nonprofits who collectively own, operate, and manage 148,000 affordable rental homes in over 2,000 properties across the country. SAFE and its members work together to advance the creation and preservation of healthy, sustainable, affordable rental homes that foster equity, opportunity, and wellness for people of limited economic resources. Loans purchased by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are just one important source of capital that they use to create and preserve homes that are affordable. But SAFE and its members value not only that capital source, but also the role that the enterprises can play in sparking innovation and changing how rental housing is financed. We also appreciate FHFA's planning process that reflects the importance of the enterprise's duty to serve, something that is even greater urgency as we recover from the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is where I wanted to begin my remarks: the recovery, how this is supported in the DTS plans through preservation activities, and how the enterprises can further contribute to an equitable future. As the eviction and forbearance moratoriums come to an end this summer, and even as relief is distributed to some, there will be longer-term impacts on affordable housing preservation. Part of the enterprise's duty to serve is to meet properties where they are now. And as the full economic consequences of the pandemic come to light, this will likely include acknowledging that some properties experience deferred maintenance, higher receivables related to uncollected rent, and higher services costs. These conditions do not necessarily reflect the long-term soundness of a borrower or an asset, so the enterprises should ensure that they don't overvalue risk associated with these temporary conditions when considering underwriting and reserve requirements. The demand for affordable rental homes remains high, and overly conservative requirements could impede access to capital when preservation capital is needed most. This could have a disproportionate impact on owners of naturally occurring affordable housing, including Black and Hispanic landlords who have faced greater struggles from the pandemic, including lost rent. I want to echo Ellen Laurie Hoffman's comments on allowing the enterprises to be eligible for duty to serve credit for housing credit investment, equity investments, and affordable housing preservation transactions, as they are for mortgage purchases and such transactions. By allowing duty to serve credit for the housing credit investments, FHFA could help ensure liquidity for preservation financing. This could be an important role to play as communities elevate affordable housing in their recovery plans. The enterprises should also be ready to meet the moment of an equitable recovery beyond targets, bringing to bear their leadership to ensure that products are safe and sound, but also adaptable for new programs and resources that may be enacted. I wanted to provide a few comments on some specific activities in the plans. Project-based Section 8 can support healthy and equitable communities through production and preservation of existing rental homes where they are needed most. We're therefore pleased to see Fannie Mae's projected increase over their 3-year baseline. Freddie Mac, while noting that it significantly exceeded the 2018 to 2020 target, however, proposes a reduction over the 3-year baseline. While we acknowledge that a portion of the high volume is likely attributable to low interest rates and an attraction to the safety of Section 8 investments through the pandemic, the proposed reduction below the baseline beginning in 2022 seems overly conservative and could contribute to missed opportunities. Interest in Section 8 properties remains high, and particularly for mission-driven actors, the kinds of creative products offered by Freddie Mac are key preservation tools. Given the volume of resources for housing in connection with COVID recovery and the strong possibility of additional resources through further legislation, we believe that Freddie Mac should plan for a continuation of high levels of activity in 2022 and potentially beyond. And while we understand the difficulties of creating new Section 515 loan purchase products, we'd also urge the enterprises to revisit their relatively modest targets for USDA rural housing. Finally, oh, and actually not finally, one additional comment. SAFE supports the enterprise's increased targeting to residential economic diversity activities. However, we're concerned that the enterprises plan to only focus on affordable housing in high opportunity areas, as opposed to also including mixed income housing in areas of concentrated poverty. SAVE members have for decades worked to make transformative investments in such areas, beginning with quality homes. A singular focus on high opportunity areas risks perpetuating patterns that don't invest in areas of concentrated poverty, often communities of color. We urge the enterprises to allow to also conduct loan and outreach activity for mixed income communities. For research, this could further lift up learnings on mixed income housing and identify factors that can be leveraged for further investment. We also strongly support the enterprise's plan to report on sustainability and resiliency, as this can be a valuable tool for practitioners and lenders seeking to preserve affordable rental homes. Increasingly frequent disruptions from climate-related disasters and other events impact all communities, but affordable rental housing is often disproportionately impacted. SAFE would encourage Freddie Mac to not just look at state climate incentives in its report, but also practices, providing a more comprehensive approach. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. We appreciate your efforts and look forward to working with you more.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. Our next speaker is Mr. Peter Lawrence from Novogradac.
Thank you. My name is Peter Lawrence. I am the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations for Novogradac. Novogradac is a nationwide accounting and consulting firm that specializes in affordable housing, community development, historic preservation, and renewable energy. We are particularly excited at the opportunity to provide comments to further change and make the enterprise's duty to serve plans more robust, given the tremendous need there is for affordable housing throughout the country. Novogradac has extensive practices within the low-income housing tax credit HUD programs, and in particular the rental assistance demonstration. And we work with all of the major affordable housing stakeholders, from the enterprises themselves to other investors, tax credit syndicators, lenders, for-profit and nonprofit developers, and state and local allocating agencies. We have more than 600 employees and 28 offices in 16 states. We have a nationwide reach through a variety of markets. I'm going to focus my remarks mostly on the low-income housing tax credit, given our firm's expertise. But I will, before talking about our remarks on that and how they intersect with the duty to serve plans, I do want to make some just sort of general remarks that I would associate with many of my colleagues that have spoken today and yesterday regarding reforming, broad policies that affect the ability of the enterprises to meet ambitious duty to serve requirements. The interim final rule on the capital requirements, the new products rulemaking that's in process, as well as the interpretation of the duty to serve statute referring to targeted equity investments. Each of these major policies should be taken a look at again in order to promote the ability for the enterprises to meet more ambitious affordable housing goals and investments. And so I want to associate my comments of my colleagues along those lines. I'll also just note that we do believe in general that many of the loan purchase goals outlined in the duty to serve plans could be made more ambitious as well. I'm not going to comment in detail about those, but again, my colleagues have spoken about that, and we largely agree with those remarks. What I would like to talk about is the low-income housing tax credit. In particular, I want to talk about the general overall size of the low-income housing tax credit and the enterprise's participation in that overall market. And with that respect, the investment caps, which I understand are not a part of the duty to serve plan, but do impact them, given that they are limit the ability of the enterprises to invest in low-income housing tax credit equity. And like several others, my colleagues, I do want to spend a little bit of time to argue for revising the duty to serve plans to permit for duty to serve credit for low-income housing tax credit equity investments that for affordable housing preservation, just as the statute expressly calls for loan purchases with respect to housing credit properties. So with respect to the low-income housing tax credit equity market, I think it is important to place the enterprise's participation in context. When the annual $500 million caps were set in 2017, the size of the low-income housing tax credit equity market, according to our estimates and informed by a variety of industry participants, was approximately just under $15 billion of equity. In the intervening 4 years, the market has expanded quite considerably beyond just the statutory inflation and population increases. And I just want to note a couple of changes that Congress has enacted since 2017. First of all, in 2018, there was a 12.5% increase in 9% housing credit allocations to the states. And that while that does expire at the end of this year, Congress is likely to consider at a minimum increase, continuing that allocation increase in light of the tremendous demand for affordable rental housing. Secondly, over the course of recent years, twice Congress has allocated special allocations of housing credit authority for disasters. Almost $1 billion were made available for California in 2020. And just last December, Congress allocated another $1.25 billion for 11 states and Puerto Rico. So a combination of $2.25 billion of additional allocations that are much of which are intended to address disasters in rural areas, which are part of the duty to serve requirements. I realize that was yesterday's session, but I do want to mention that in the overall context. The final major change that Congress has enacted was the establishment of a 4% floor for properties that are financed with tax-exempt private activity bonds, and thus triggering 4% housing credit authority. That establishment increased the volume of 4% credits by a considerable amount. And our estimates, when you add all of these various changes together, we are estimating for 2021 allocations of just under $26 billion. Now, the equity pricing for those allocations have come down a little bit, but it's a dynamic market. It's ever changing, and we have noticed a slight increase in recent months after that decrease at the beginning of the year. And so we're estimating at the end of the year, the equity market is going to be somewhere around $22 to $23 billion in total. So given that overall increase from just under $15 billion to probably or somewhere of 22 to 23 billion. That if FHFA is intending to maintain the same overall percentage of the equity market for the enterprises as they were in 2017, at a minimum, the annual caps should be increased to approximately 800 million each, as opposed to 500 million, just to keep up the size. And I would urge, if FHFA were to take that stage, they could then enable a greater portion of the requirements that they would urge the enterprises to meet for respect to the rural as well as the affordable housing preservation duty to serve requirements. I do understand that there would need to be a change to the duty to serve plans for the enterprises to accommodate that, and I would urge you to do that. Equity is as important as debt to affordable housing preservation for multifamily properties. In fact, often equity is the more significant financing source. So it's the clean interpretation of the statute would, we believe, permit FHFA to allow duty to serve credit for housing credit equity properties, and it would be an important additional tool in the toolbox.
1 minute remaining.
So I will stop there and urge, and just to recap again on the housing credit, urge FHFA to consider increasing the overall investment caps, which do indirectly impact the ability of enterprises to meet their rural and preservation duty serve requirements, as well as permit equity investment to be something eligible for duty serve credit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. And so now we have our last guest speaker is Ms. Erin Burns-Main and Sadie McKeown, both speaking from Community Preservation Corporation.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Sadie McKeown. I'm the Executive Vice President and Head of Construction Lending and Initiatives at the Community Preservation Corporation, also known as CPC. I'm joined today by my colleague, Erin Burns-Main. She's our Vice President in charge of policy and advocacy. We're pleased to have the opportunity to comment on the enterprise's duty to serve, and we are appreciative that you've invited us to speak today. I want to echo our prior speakers' comments and thanking all of you for the work that you do, and thanking the GSEs for digging deeper and reaching further and trying to do more under duty to serve. CPC is a not-for-profit multifamily affordable housing lender. We're a certified CDFI, and we are the only CDFI in the country that actually has a mortgage bank under our not-for-profit umbrella called CPC Mortgage Company. We have 2 licenses with Fannie Mae, 3 with Freddie Mac, and 2 with FHA. And so we are an active lender in the GSE world. CPC was formed in 1974 in direct response to property abandonment and blight in New York City that New York City was facing at that time. And over our 47-year history, we financed the preservation and construction of nearly 220,000 units of residential housing. We've supported numerous downtown revitalizations and improved the quality, resilience, and energy efficiency of the multifamily stock across New York State and beyond. We are a recognized leader in the industry, advancing underwriting energy performance in our first mortgages, and we have deep expertise in working with small and affordable property owners. CPC lends in conjunction with every government source that's out there to support affordable housing. We've deployed nearly $12 billion in private and public capital for affordable housing and community development. And CPC finances affordable multifamily housing lends, and we also lend in rural areas. We're highly focused on supporting BIPOC developers in brown and black neighborhoods and elevating entrepreneurs of color. Given CPC's mission and our focus on lending in markets where traditional capital sources are often absent, our primary concern in any proposed rulemaking affecting the enterprises is that their products continue to provide long-term flexible capital that reaches owners and developers of affordable housing and small properties. To better address the most relevant obstacles in the affordable housing markets, CPC recommends the following strategies to increase liquidity in the applicable underserved markets. CDFIs, of which CPC is one, are all mission-driven financial institutions that focus our resources and our expertise in the nation's most underserved urban, suburban, and rural communities across the country. Nonprofit CDFIs possess a unique understanding of local community needs and work effectively with community-based partners, government entities to create and preserve affordable housing. We also support the smallest owners and naturally occurring affordable housing in the neighborhoods that we serve. As such, we believe that the FHFA should direct the enterprises to target not less than 1.5% of their annual multifamily purchase volume for loans exclusively originated by nonprofit CDFIs. And along with that, provide the flexibility and the support required for those CDFIs to be able to do that. So we think that's really important. The CDFIs address a need in the market that the rest of the conventional mortgage bankers that are using the GSE products do not meet. We work very uniquely with owners that need access to long-term, low-rate capital that the GSEs provide and that are not being served by the larger mortgage banks in the market. The FHFA should also direct the enterprises to purchase more forward commitments on the low-income housing tax credit projects and other projects that are subsidized for Capital A affordable housing, and lock interest rates out at the start of construction out up to 36 months, because these projects, unlike conventional assets, do not have the ability to increase rents at the back end once construction is completed and properties are leased and seasoned for delivery. So they cannot bear any interest rate risk associated with waiting to find out what your interest rate is going to be at construction completion. The enterprises can afford to take the interest rate risk, but affordable housing cannot. So as an affordable housing construction lender, we find it critically important to be able to lock the interest rate at the time we close the construction loan so that we have certainty upon takeout that our construction loans can be paid back because we know what the interest rate is going in. The interest rate risk associated with not being able to do that can't be borne not only by the CDFIs that are doing the construction lending or other construction lenders for affordable housing, but we do believe that the GSEs can afford to take that risk. Next, building upon the enterprise's successful green loan programs and their existing infrastructure to support energy efficiency, we believe that the FHFA should direct the enterprises to elevate their game and to do more as it relates to the changes in the climate and how it's impacting real estate across the country. Low and moderate income owners and low and moderate income families that live in distressed neighborhoods are already bearing the brunt of poor environmental outcomes. And we really need Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to address this through their lending by increasing and elevating their game and their standards around how a building should perform. So we believe that the GSE should increase their standards for building performance, and alongside of that, enhance the incentives that they provide with lower rates and more proceeds so that the proceeds can help pay for the increased cost of making those buildings high performance. And we think that the most aggressive threshold, the deepest interest rate reductions should be for buildings that are converting to all electric or being built new with all electric and not using fossil fuels in any of their building systems or any of their equipment. Because we believe very deeply that this is consistent with the Biden administration's 2030 greenhouse gas pollution reduction targets and in keeping with a transition to a clean energy economy. So Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae valuing and supporting and driving through their requirements more high performance building, more renewable energy, less buildings that rely on fossil fuel, could be a leader in the industry to get us to where we need to go with respect to multifamily, particularly affordable housing, as it relates to transitioning off of fossil fuels and onto renewable electric heating and cooling. Lastly, now more than ever, there is a need for bringing mission-driven capital to communities of color, which have experienced decades of disinvestment and are now disproportionately experiencing the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The FHFA should actively work to reduce barriers to BIPOC owners, Black and Brown Indigenous people of color, accessing GSE-sponsored debt. The enterprises should conduct an audit of historical lending with respect to BIPOC borrowers and set baseline targets to ensure that they improve providing capital to that group of owners and operators. CPC has found that there has been, while there has been investment in brown and Black neighborhoods, that investment has not necessarily been or intentionally been for people from the community, for BIPOC owners and developers who really need to access GSE capital, particularly as they are emerging. They typically lack the friends and family or the support from generational wealth that's built up through real estate, primarily by white owners and operators, and they need significant support in order to be able to generate that wealth for themselves and for their families and their futures. So given that affordable housing providers often cannot rely on rent increases to support property maintenance and operations, we believe that long-term predictable capital is essential to a thriving and robust affordable housing market. The enterprises have a unique opportunity to ensure such capital is available through their networks of seller servicers, including CDFIs, with easily accessible loan products for developer owners who are not necessarily large enough to participate in programs such as the low-income housing tax credit and other national initiatives. Our experience is that the GSEs are very good at supporting seasoned and experienced developers that have been in the business for generations and for years, but not necessarily at reaching through and trying to support and grow emerging developers and owners of smaller properties that are naturally occurring affordable housing. We think Freddie and Fannie need to do a better job at that. The housing market and community needs have changed significantly since the enterprise's initial plans were released. And we think it's critical that you really evaluate this from a macro perspective, particularly given the confluence of events that we're seeing with, with respect to climate change, global warming, and the racial reckoning that happened last year as a result of George Floyd's death. And we think it's very important that Freddie and Fannie elevate their game and enhance their products to support BIPOC developers, affordable housing in our most distressed brown and Black communities. And that's not just multifamily, that's also single family. And really with an eye towards making those units as energy efficient, deeply energy efficient, and converting to all electric as those buildings transition. So that will be the end of my comments. Thank you again for allowing CPC to participate. And we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Burns-Main and Ms. McKeown. Before we begin our closing remarks from the enterprises, I do want to reintroduce our head of the Duty to Serve team, Mr. Ted Wortell.
Thanks very much, Toy. I just wanted to, on the behalf of Marcia and our Duty to Serve team and FHFA, I really want to say thank you again to everyone for their time this afternoon and their time putting together the comment letters on our RFI. We know those take a lot of time, but we gathered a lot of extremely helpful suggestions and feedback today, both for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and certainly for FHFA. We definitely heard those, and we'll take those back as well. I also want to thank everyone for the passion on these issues, which came through very clearly today, and we appreciate. And lastly, a thank you to the teams, the Duty to Serve teams at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who I don't think we work with them every day directly, but maybe every other day. Certainly at times it seems that way. Thank them. They work extremely hard, as I think you all know, and really share that same passion. So thank you, everyone. I hope all of you can return tomorrow at 1 o'clock for the last listening session on manufactured housing. So with that, I will throw it back to Toy.
Thank you, Ted. Okay, so now we will begin hearing closing remarks from the enterprises. And first up, we will hear from Freddie Mac.
All right. Thank you, Toy, and thank you to everybody for all the thought-provoking comments and feedback on some really important themes today. Themes that we really value and are focused on, especially racial equity. This year we've appointed 2 vice presidents of equity and housing, Amanda Nunnink in multifamily and Pamela Perry in single family, and we're actively working on ways we can leverage our platform to address these longstanding issues. And a lot of what was covered today and what Duty to Serve is all about, right, is complex and nuanced, and it requires a consistent focus over time in both broad ways and really specific ways. And different components of these markets have different needs at different times, right? And like all of you, we're committed to working on these issues now and in the years to come, and in evolving our plans when and where possible. So, we'll take all of your feedback into account as we continue working on our plan this year. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aber. Closing remarks. We'll now hear closing remarks from Fannie Mae. Mr. Michael Hernandez.
Got me.
Great.
Hey, Toy. Thank you. Thanks again to everyone. It's been a very enlightening day. I just want to say it's important to be challenged to do more. We certainly heard that from all of you. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And that's how we continue to do things that are going to stretch our organization and help the broadest market. I also want to assure you that everyone at Fannie Mae, from our CEO to our summer interns, all of us come to work every day focused on how we create wealth for families, how we improve the lives of homeowners and renters, and how we ensure equity across our initiatives. Duty to Serve is one critical component of all the efforts we have underway to serve our mission. Many of the speakers touched on some of these broader themes, like our leadership in ESG, our green efforts, our disaster response efforts, and our racial equity efforts that we're deploying to fundamentally change not only our business, but the business of housing across the country. And these are just some examples of how we're stretching to meet the moment that we have presented to us today. Most of that work is not captured in Duty to Serve, but is part of what we're committed to every day. So I welcome your specific feedback as you're providing your written comments. Tell us how we can specifically implement some of the initiatives that you did. I know you shared some, but thinking about this broader context, how do we move in that direction? And then also that'll help us prioritize this effort with FHFA as we move forward. It's critical that we continue to stretch and learn. It's critical that we meet and exceed our Duty to Serve objectives. And it's important that Duty to Serve is a component of every mission, that activity that we do, all our ESG activities, and all of that is going to fundamentally change housing. Let me stop there and turn it over to Crystal and Sarah, who are going to give you a bit more feedback from what we heard today. Thank you.
Hi, this is
Crystal Bergman with Fannie Mae, and I've had the privilege of working on the Affordable Housing Preservation Plan in multifamily for the last 3 years. So I just want to echo what we've heard from FHFA and from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that we greatly appreciate your commitment and your passion and your showing up to share your expertise with us. We know that you, everyone here has dedicated their careers to these underserved markets and others. So we really appreciate your insight and your thoughtfulness. Specifically on multifamily, we look forward to continuing the conversation both with FHFA on this current plan and with you all to talk about how we can operationalize some of these ideas and suggestions to make sure that we're as impactful as possible. I wanted to just touch on a couple of things, and we got some great helpful feedback on almost every aspect of the plan, the draft plan that we submitted. So that's, again, very helpful. We heard from everyone on 515 and our liquidity and loan purchase goals on 515. We have come to an agreement with USDA on the subordination issue, so that's very exciting. We look forward to talking with everyone here and figuring out how we can be most impactful in our 515 loan purchases as quickly as we can. We heard a lot about green. We consider ourselves a leader in the green finance market. We want to continue to be a leader in that area, and we look forward to how we can make sure that we're doing that. We heard a lot about low-income housing tax credits, both on the equity side, but also on the debt side. And we heard the feedback, and we hear the feedback about ensuring that we're preserving these properties and ensuring the preservation of these properties. So we're looking forward to digging in more on that. We heard about naturally occurring affordable housing and thinking creatively about how we can make sure that we're preserving that. And then areas of concentrated poverty within the residential economic diversity. So we agree, we certainly don't want to be, not working in those areas, and that certainly wasn't the point of the plan at all, or the residential economic diversity work. So again, we are eager to take this feedback to heart and to take it back to our internal teams and work externally as well to make sure that we're being as impactful as we can. And I'll turn it to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Crystal, and thanks to everybody for all of your comments today on the plan. Just a couple of multifamily pieces. NCST, thanks for your comments. Would love to talk a little bit more about how to add detail. We are planning to add some detail to our objective around partnerships, and would love to talk about the right way to make commitments that we can be held accountable to, while also creating some flexibility to meet the market needs that will be evolving over the next several months as we come out of as we move out from the foreclosure moratoriums. I wanted to just say a couple things on shared equity. We are committed to making the shared equity financing as simple as possible, as I mentioned at the top, and have enjoyed working with partners like Grounded Solutions and small programs across the country as we improve our offerings and to pursue standardization efforts like the model deed restriction that Vince mentioned in his comments. Once the GSEs and our partners fully finalize the model documents, we look forward to working together on a successful rollout to promote the adoption. We're committed to a strong rollout, to the guide changes that are needed to support the MDR, but we urge our partners to finalize the documents so that we can begin the next phase of work together. In terms of loan purchases, for the first year of the plan, we proposed purchasing 175 shared equity loans. This is slightly short of the recommendation that Grounded Solutions made at the October listening session of 200. And that's partly because the size of the market is still very difficult size, as Vince mentioned, and the lack of visibility into when additional units are coming online has made it difficult to set more ambitious targets there. During our first cycle of duty to serve work, we've also discovered that in many markets, liquidity is often not the barrier. Demand for financing is largely met by local and regional banks who are choosing to hold these loans in portfolio rather than selling them to us. Our hope is that we start to see more subsidy in this space, and subsidy continues to grow, generating new units. And when those new units come on, we will have a simple execution ready to go to meet the increased demand. And in the meantime, we will continue to to expand our footprint as much as we can. And we'll also explore whether there is more ways to add value in the refinance space in the next cycle, as you suggested, Vince. So thank you everybody for your comments. Look forward to working together as we finalize the plan. We'd love to follow up with some of you and as we execute the plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Edelman. Okay, so that concludes today's session. And like Ted, I also just want to thank you all for your comments. We really appreciate them. Thank you for joining us today. The public comment period closes on July 17th. So there is still time to submit your comments. Note that date is on a Saturday. However, that does not mean that the deadline extends to Monday. So just want to point out that deadline actually does close on July 17th. So please submit written comments, and we encourage you to visit our Duty to Serve website at www.fhfa.gov/duty-to-DTS, where you can find links to submit those comments. Thank you.